Hey guys, Tom Barclay here. I've just got back from the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium where I've just seen Spurs come through against AZ Alkmaar in a crucial game, a crucial victory for Ange Postecoglou. Doesn't really bear thinking about what might have happened had they gone out tonight, and which would have basically ended their season and would have really put his job under threat, you would imagine. But they came through, they managed to overcome a 1-0 deficit from the first leg. And it wasn't just the fact that the result, which is obviously what mattered most. It was the performance as well, and particularly I thought the third goal, the quality of the third goal, was fantastic to watch and kind of vintage Ange ball really. It was the kind of goal that they scored quite a few times last season, and something we really haven't seen much of over this sort of long hard winter in the last sort of 3.5 months, where they've really lacked personnel due to injuries, and it was a real reminder of what they are capable of, this Postecoglou team, and when they're playing well and confident, how aesthetically pleasing their football can be, why neutrals loved them last season, but also how effective it can be. Now, before we go sort of right into the performance and wax too lyrical about it tonight and what it all means, yes, it was AZ Alkmaar. AZ Alkmaar, who proved to be very tough nut to crack in the first leg, and let's be honest, Spurs, if it weren't for a couple of fantastic saves from Guglielmo Vicario, could have basically been out of this tie at half-time. It could easily be 3-0 from that first leg. So poor was their performance out in the Netherlands, but also Alkmaar proving to be a really solid team that night. Troy Parrott was obviously a player that Spurs sold for $6.5 million this summer, but to AZ, but he proved a real thorn in their side in that game. But having said that, this was a striker who never really got a look in for Tottenham, who was leading the line for RZ, as it's supposed to be pronounced. So that kind of underlines really the difference on paper, at least, quality between the two sides. And this is a game that Spurs really should be looking to win. And if they hadn't won, it'd been a massive disappointment. But that takes away the context of the pressure on the team, on the manager going into this game, the fact that the whole season was kind of riding on it, managed to stay in this stay in this competition, given how badly the league form has been going and the fact that they're out of both domestic cups. But look, staying in it now, they're through to the last 8, and even though there's obviously a massively long way to go on that front, the possibility of ending this difficult second season under Postecoglou, riddled with injuries, unfortunately, still the possibility of having a triumphant finale. It can still happen, which is a reason to be really optimistic after tonight, I think. So going into the performance, I thought there was an aggression about Spurs' performance which has been sorely lacking in recent months at times. When Spurs have been poor over the last few months in particular, Postecoglou has often said after the game that he felt his team has been too passive. He said that after the North London derby defeat where they lost away from home. He said that after the Liverpool crushing 4-0 defeat in the Carabao Cup semi-final. I think he said it other times. It's quite a regular refrain from Postecoglou after bad performances, but it was the polar opposite tonight. They were really aggressive in everything they did, which I really think he believes, and I agree, is where they're at their best, when they're really going after the opposition and putting in really aggressive performances. And I think that was really started from the two centre-backs. So obviously this was the first game that Romero and Van der Ven started together since that Chelsea game on December the 8th, where they both got injured, and has been such a crucial touch point for this season in where it's gone wrong, really, the fact that they've been out ever since, pretty much. But they were both so aggressive in their play, not just crunching into tackles or some of the dribbling. It was also the passing was really incisive, particularly from Romero going forward. It was really different compared to his last start at Bournemouth at the weekend, where it was his first start since that Chelsea game, and he was all over the place, let's be honest. I mean, some of his passing was so wayward, so misplaced, and Bournemouth should have really capitalised early doors, even 18 seconds in from one of those particularly bad passes in that game. But it was nothing like that today. He looked supremely focused right from the off, Romero. His passing was crisp, it was accurate, and he was taking no prisoners as well. Some of the crunching challenges were sort of vintage Romero, and there was one moment where he was seemingly not happy with his old teammate Troy Parrott for what he thought was feigning injury, and gave him sort of both barrels, as did Van der Ven as well. And I think that kind of was the springboard for the rest of the team to get after AZ right from the off, and was just what they needed to give that sort of kick up the arse, really. That's what they've been lacking of late, and it sort of just made you remember what quality players they are. I feel like Romero at times has had some moments this season when he has been fit where he hasn't been at his best and has maybe been liable, for a couple of the goals, like in the first Northumberland derby defeat where they lost 1-0. Probably should have done better against Gabriel, but this underlines, what a top player he is and what an influence he can have on the rest of his teammates, which is why I think Ange rates him so highly and often speaks so highly of him. And that was a big part of it. And it wasn't just them, it was the pressing of the front three in particular. I felt like there was an energy and a determination and a sort of just speed of running from Solanke, Odobert, who obviously we'll come on to, and Sonny up top. They really did press, as got after AZ, and that's the Spurs have been at their best under Ange this season. Like, if you remember the start of the season, the first few games, yes, it was disappointing when they didn't beat Leicester or Newcastle when they lost. There were some bad results at the start, but actually the performances I thought were pretty good, and that's what Postecoglou thought. And a big part of that was how they just got after teams, and I think they were statistically at one point like the most high pressing, impressive team on that front in the whole of the top teams in Europe, and that's what they really pride themselves on. But it's been so missing in recent months due to lack of personnel and fatigue amongst the team. But it was back in spades tonight, I thought, and was a big part of the win. And actually, it was what brought about the first goal, which I'll come on to in a second. But I felt like the first 20 minutes, even though they didn't actually create any chances or any clear-cut chances, there was a sort of positivity about the way they went about things that kind of suggested it was going to be a good night for Spurs. Even though this is Tottenham, this is Postecoglou's Tottenham, it wasn't like there weren't going to be any hairy moments, and we'll come on to those as well. But anyway, what was it, about sort of 20 odd minutes in, it was some really sort of great industry closing down from Son that sort of set up the first goal. He managed to close down a defender. The defender's pass sort of deflects off Son, goes to Solanke, who lays it back, and who's there? Wilson Odobert, who crashes home his first goal for Spurs, his first goal in a Spurs shirt, and what a time to get it. Now, I thought going into this game that, if you remember my preview from it the other day, that he might go with Odobert on the right. Just didn't think Johnson had played that well in the last few games, and if anything, I think Odobert technically looks a better player. Postecoglou talked about him. I asked him a few weeks ago about how much of a miss he's been, and he talked about Odobert being kind of unique in his squad, a kind of player that who has attributes that he doesn't really have in his other players, and the way he sort of takes players on. I feel like Son used to do that a lot, maybe a little less now, but Odobert really does have that ability, and we saw it tonight. But he also had some end product too, and it was a really good finish. His first goal since the opening day of the season for Burnley, not for Spurs. It was when he scored against Luton, opening day of the season, and I think 4 days later he signed for Spurs for about 25 to around £30 million. And you knew from the beginning that Ange rated him, because as soon as he signed him, despite him being 19 at the time, he's 20 now, he threw him in straight away. He played again that Newcastle game where he missed like a really good chance, but he really clearly rated him highly. And then obviously he gets that injury at Coventry, that hamstring early doors in that Carabao Cup game, and he was injured basically ever since. Seemed to have a setback, and you wondered whether his season might be over. He's been brought back in of late, and Ange made the point against in the Man City game where he started over there that he felt like he was going to need him, and I think Johnson started that game too to be game changers in the sort of weeks following. And I was critical at the time, given the gap in time between the Man City game and the AZ game was about 8 days, saying that, basically like, I feel like at the time, if they'd gone with a stronger team, it might have made more of a chance of beating City. But let's be honest, the Europa League, even at that point, was all that really matters. And I think, to be fair to Ange, tonight's performance from Odobert completely vindicated his decision to play him in that game, because maybe he was up to speed by today as a result of playing that Man City game. So fair cop to him, and he was brilliant. So he obviously got that early goal. Had a hand in the second one. was it just after half time, moments after sort of one of those hairy moments that I alluded to earlier, where Vicario was kind of messing around with the ball right at his feet while Parrott was closing him down, and for a second you thought Parrott was going to nick it off him and score, into an empty net. But seconds later, Porro wins the ball out wide right, gives it to Odobert, drives it on, passes it on to Maddison, who has a lovely little 1-2 with Son, and then fires it into the net for his 11th goal of the season. Perfect timing for Maddison ahead of what will be tomorrow, but actually right now it's actually today, because it's 1 a.m. right now when I'm filming this. I don't know when you'll be watching it. Might put it out early morning on Friday morning, but it won't be long till since when watching this, when the England squad will be announced. He'll obviously be hoping to be in there. He's got massive competition to get into that squad, so let's see if he does make it. But Tuchel has been in touch, which is good. But either way, his numbers are fantastic. That was his 11th goal of the season, and he took his goal well. And it was nice to see Son and Maddison linking up well in that for that goal, because that was a staple of last season. That Maddison combination was really, really effective, particularly in that first sort of halcyon period of those first 10 games, and again something we haven't seen as much. Then after that, Spurs were looking good, but always have a bit of a vulnerability at the back. But the goal that they conceded I felt like a real bad luck. Odobert runs back, does well to intercept, and then the ball goes to Bergvall, and maybe it's a bit of a careless pass from Bergvall. He basically tries to pass it and he hits Odobert, and the ball is loose, and suddenly, Coop Miners is suddenly in. But I mean, he absolutely clinically makes them pay with a fantastic finish into the far corner. It sort of sums up the way it's been for Spurs this season. Nothing comes easy, I suppose. I mean, another player, another day fires that wide, but he absolutely buries it, and you're thinking, at this point, how's it going to go? But Spurs, to be fair to them, kept their heads. They persevered, and then the third goal, which ultimately won the tie, was just fantastic to watch. It was a really, really sort of super sweeping move involving, I'm trying to remember it now, involving quite a few players. It was all started, wasn't it, by this wonderful turn from Maddison, really underlining what a class player he is on his day. Brilliant turn, like vision and awareness of players around him to turn himself out of trouble, opens up the space, quite near his own box, really, deep into his half, drives the ball forward, gives it to, I can't quite remember where it goes to, but eventually it comes out to Son and Spence, and I think they play a bit of a 1-2. Spence puts the ball across. Solanke goes for this back heel. I presume he's trying to just deflect it towards goal, or maybe a sort of a shot rather than an ingenious pass to Odobert, but either way he does well. And there's Odobert at the back stick, like we often see with the right wingers in Ange's team, and he puts it away for his second goal for the club in a matter of 90 minutes. 2 goals already, and the match winner. And it was a lovely moment, really. And there were a few hairy moments after that, but overall I think Spurs were well worthy of their victory. It was a nice moment at the end of the game when I think it was Basuma sort of pushing Odobert over to the head of the south stand to sort of get the reception that he deserves, because it's been such a difficult season. He's been Mr. Forgettable, hasn't he? Mr. Invisible, because of all these injuries, and suddenly he's the centre of attention and been absolutely fantastic. So good on him, really. What other things did I really enjoy? Yeah, I guess I mentioned Maddison and Son. I thought they were really on their game tonight. I think there have been times this season where, despite Maddison's pretty good output, and Son's isn't bad either, I think both of them at times haven't played as well as Spurs fans would have hoped. They've been a bit sort of too inconsistent, like the whole team themselves, and been a big part of why that inconsistency from the most key players in the team has been partly why they've struggled. So I do think they are due criticism over the course of the season, but tonight I thought they really were key players. Son, there were moments where things weren't quite clicking, but he looked kind of dangerous throughout the game. I mean, again, this is, they're not the greatest opposition, let's be honest, AZ, so we have to sort of countenance all of this with who they were playing. But it was good to see, how much of a threat. And there was one moment where he sort of drove forward in the first half. We picked up the ball and ran forward. And for a lot of people sort of thinking that Son's legs had gone, I felt like that moment sort of underline how they probably haven't. It's not that. It does feel like a lot of it is confidence. I think maybe you could argue that he's not quite as sort of devastating with his pace anymore, or at least his sort of jinking movement. I do think there's something in that. But when you're just literally running and dribbling the ball and sort of racing forward, I don't know if that's gone as much. And I thought overall he was very good. I thought Maddison was fantastic, like I say. But the night really did belong to Wilson Odobert. Just on to some of Ange's comments. He said it was a big night. He said, the outside noise. He mentioned the outside noise. The situation with his position, the significance of this game if they'd lost it. He said it didn't outside noise hadn't bothered him, but the players, the club knew it was a big night, and he was happy with how they handled it, which I think is a fair comment on that front. He said it was no coincidence that they're looking a bit more like their old selves now they're getting their players back, which again seems pretty stands to reason. He was super pleased, he said, for Odobert. He talks about how he'd been working silently, with trying to come back from his injury, and how the move, it was a big move for him and it hadn't worked out so far through no fault of his own, just purely because of injury, and how frustrated it's been for Postecoglou's perspective not to be able to showcase his talents. But he feels like he's got, massive potential. And was just really, really pleased for his performance, which he must be. And I asked him specifically about the importance of the third goal, because I felt like the third goal was significant, because, as I said before, we just haven't seen that kind of football, that kind of Ange ball kind of stereotype, which is why people that's the whole appeal of Postecoglou, that he can produce, his teams can produce moments like that, which are just so for the football purists. I mean, whether it's enough and consistently enough to be successful overall is up for fans to judge. But when it's good, as I've consistently said, when it's good, it's great, and that was an example of it. And having not had it for such a long time, a goal like that, probably because of injuries, how important and satisfying was it, basically, that he scored a goal like that? And he agreed it was important. I think it's important for confidence for the team to realise that they are sort of capable of it. I guess overall it sort of shows what's possible. But I mean, I guess we have to sort of counter this also with the fact that Spurs have had some good performances this season, and they followed up with some pretty terrible ones. It's Fulham on Sunday. I mean, at least this victory sort of hopefully makes all the noise sort of dies down really over the next period. It's a bit of a while away till the quarter final, and presumably while the Europa League's still alive, Ange is definitely fine, you'd imagine. But having said that, they still need to sort of build on this and build momentum, and I think it's building belief amongst the fan base. I mean, so many, I can see them from the comments. I feel like the commenters regularly that I get on here, and I appreciate them all, and I particularly appreciate the guys who've been sort of on it right from the beginning, I suppose, since I've been doing this. Some of the comments, I've been quite fair. I feel like quite often I get these comments that come in about how much they sort of, part of the appeal, I suppose, of these videos, it seems to be the balance of it, and how I hopefully call it like I see it without getting too sort of over the top. And but even so, in recent times, I've noticed, some people who've been saying, I've been very sort of pro Ange, but of late I've been starting to lose faith. And I don't think people should be sort of blamed for that. You can feel however you want to feel, but it's been rough, it's been difficult. And I think the last week in particularly the AZ first leg performance, was understandable that it would knock confidence given he had players back, and it was really, really poor. But by the same token, hopefully this performance can sort of breathe new life into it and reinvigorate people's belief. But again, it's just one game, and it's about building something more than that. So they need to build on it to continue to rebuild that belief, in my opinion. It's not just one game. But ultimately, it's the Europa League that really matters this season, and they've got a tricky tie next. They really do. They've got Frankfurt. Crucially, the second leg is away rather than the first leg. So they are going to have to go and do it over in Frankfurt. It's a place that I know well now because I've been there a lot, particularly with England and the Euros this summer. But also I went via it with Hoffenheim. But also I actually did do the Spurs Frankfurt game in the Champions League under Conte just a few years ago. And overriding memory from that game, which was a pretty poor game as I recall, I think it might have been 0-0. There was one moment where Kane, there was a ball across and he almost put it in, but he didn't. It was a pretty poor game, but my overriding memory was the cacophony of noise that that the Frankfurt sort of ultras produced pretty much throughout the game. Is where you sit in that big stadium for the press is very high up. You've got a very high vantage point looking down, and but even then, you know, sometimes you struggle to hear yourself think, and that is something that they're going to have to put up with. Spurs when they go there, and particularly in the second leg. Frankfurt are a team that blew Ajax away at home tonight. I think they won 4-1. They won away from home as well. They're going to be another level up, I think. And they're a team that have really, really impressed with their recruitment strategy, recruitment policy in recent years. Obviously, they sold some of the buying and selling has been fantastic. I mean, that game when they played Spurs, they had Kolo Muani, who's obviously was a player that Spurs were interested in. They sold him for big money to PSG. Now on loan at Juventus. Now, obviously, Omar Moumoussi went to Man City this window. I was watching the PSG game the other day against Liverpool, and I was really impressed with this Ecuadorian centre-back who to be honest, I hadn't known much about before that game, called William Pacho. And I've looked him up, and basically Frankfurt signed him start of last season from Royal Antwerp. He was only there a year, and they sold him for 40 odd million euros to PSG, and now looks absolutely wonderful, like brilliant centre-back. Which is obviously, you know, looking at that trajectory, it's a player that Spurs could have been all over if they spotted him. And I'm sure a lot of other clubs will be kicking themselves that they weren't on him quicker. But it speaks to the impressive recruitment that Frankfurt have had, and they're going to be, like I say, a hostile atmosphere. Just finally, on talking about atmospheres, I thought Spurs fans were really impressive tonight. I know that obviously Vicario and Ange and Son had all kind of called on the fans to really create a big atmosphere, and that kind of irked a few fans, I suppose, feeling like they were being told to sort of raise their game when the team hadn't been themselves, or at least that's how some people took it. Not everyone, but some people did. But fair play to Spurs fans. I thought right from the off, there was a really, really good atmosphere in the ground, and I think that energy helped the team perform the way they did. So overall, I feel like, you know, everyone involved from Spurs tonight really should have a bit of a pat on the back from a good night. But like I say, Frankfurt next, a bigger test to come. The bigger test that will really sort of define how Postecoglou's second season should be judged, I suppose. But, you know, that's all to come. Let's park that for a second, and let's just focus on a really encouraging win under trying circumstances that Postecoglou and his side have pulled off tonight. So hats off to them. Cheers, guys.